heavy metal is all about literally the awesome power of electricity through guitar.
What's that? Oh, well, that's what you apply, metal. Huh? Is it? Weighty.
Something that's thick, dense, intense.
Something with gravitas.
Heavy is slowing it down, making it deeper, darker, moodier.
Glowering.
Machine-like, buzzing, snarling power.
I understand what it means now, and it's, well, I think I understand what it means.
Huge, great power chords wiping you off your feet.
Dark connotations with violence.
Metal lives in a world of its own creation. It's its own World of Warcraft.
Heavy, a little bit too much for us. And that maybe is the definition, it's too much.
It's more that industrial sound, more, I don't know, heavy, I suppose. Heavy metal.
Once upon a time, there was no heavy metal music anywhere. There was just the factory landscape of the Midlands and the industrialised North, where the sounds and smells of metal manufacture hung heavily in the air.
I've always felt it's really cool that metal is synonymous with the Midlands, you know.
I've heard people say it's in the water and things like that. And there's this steel industry thing that used to be with fat drop forges and all that.
I can remember as a kid at R.C. Thomas School in Bloxwich, we'd be doing English and we'd be next to a metal foundry and the steam hammers would be banging up and down. And the whole desk would be shaking.
You could always hear the steam hammers. So there was always a steel mill, you know, within audible distance.
Walking home, you'd get I mean, they can't do it now, but in those days, the air was full of all these bits of metal grit, and you could taste it and you could breathe it in.
It's so simple, really. I mean, if you're born in Mecca, for example, it's most unlikely you're going to grow up to be a Catholic. Everything you do is shaped by your environment. I think by the time you get to about 8 years old, when your mind starts becoming very fertile, and your imagination is shaped by the house you live in, the street you live in.
If you had to get up at 7 in the morning, walk into British Steel on a frosty morning, the other thing that it does, it gives you determination to get out of there.
Maybe it was a kind of escape, you know. You can't nip down to the beach and with your acoustic guitar, can you? You're kind of stuck in your bedroom with a fuzzy guitar. Yeah.
You know, it comes out of the north in swathes. You know, you look at those pictures of people with a little cigarette in the corner of their mouth, you know, and a dark look in their eye. It's inner city music, isn't it?
Some of us say from the Midlands we actually breathed in the metal before it came to be a real thing and a real experience, and I'm sure that's true, that the connection, because of what metal represents to a lot of people, it's this very tough, hard working class, honest people from the Midlands particularly, that are part of the psychology, if you will, the roots of the metal experience.
This now vanished industrial world incubated what would eventually become heavy metal music. But when were the signs of its coming first heard among the pounding jackhammers? Let's board a bus in the 1960s.
No one actually can come up with a definitive answer as to when metal really began. The earliest record they might well be able to identify with is a 1964 single from the Kinks called You Really Got Me.
Dave Davies played no, 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 no. It's like, okay, you know, raucous guitar, it's here.
I got a razor blade and I slashed the cone of the speaker up. It came out really raunchy and buzzy.
That might well be the moment that metal was born.
The basis behind all great rock music is cool riffs, really. When it starts, that's where it starts. When you haven't got anything at all, a riff makes everything else happen, I think.
It was a great era for people inventing themselves and their own music, because suddenly there were less rules.
Songs about my area, my street, my culture, my mates, my football club, my beliefs. And this is Teenage Power.
Then there was bands in Birmingham, bands in Manchester, bands in Newcastle. There was tremendous richness, and there was a lot to feed off.
Then you had a period where growing musicians outgrew pop bands. You've just got to look at the greatest pop group that turned so many musicians into rock musicians, the Yardbirds. Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck. I mean, this is just one band.
One band, but part of a movement. The British blues boom. Youthful, aggressive and irreverent.
We found our own way of singing it and our own way of playing it. And because we were young when we learnt it, we took the aggressive side of it and pushed it, I think. I mean, when my first band did Hoochie Coochie Man, you know, we played it loud and hard.
Blues you can only play 12 bars for so long, you know. Yeah, well, I mean, even now it's boring, really, you know. Well, certainly English blues is, you know.
I suppose it's a post-beatnik thing as well that was more applicable to us than people who were half a generation before us. You know, expressing yourself. That's what was coming, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Really, I suppose.
We were waiting for that first little box on the floor with a button on it to go.
Jimi Hendrix arrived in Britain from Seattle, possibly on the way to Planet Metal.
Jimi Hendrix is one of ours. Doesn't matter who tries to claim him as being Hendrix, the guitar got blah-de-blah-de-blah. He belongs to rock and metal. That's where he is. That's where he belongs. He is one of us, if you want.
Everybody looked up to Hendrix, and Hendrix is, you know, might have pioneered the distortion and feedback and wah-wah and several things people probably took from Hendrix. But he was sort of more blues, and he didn't get into that hard rock somehow. He didn't like repetitive riffs that maybe Deep Purple and Sabbath started doing.
It was at that point that I realised I'd like to do that, you know, as opposed to work for British Steel, which I did at the time, you know.
A band that I think perhaps had quite a bit to do with what became hard rock, which became heavy metal, and I'd like to put forward Cream.
By the time they split up in 1968, Cream had transformed American blues into British psychedelic rock, with heavy riffs, pounding drums, screaming vocals and wailing guitar, almost every essential component of a future metal performance.
You got the Cream who came along, you got people like Fleetwood Mac and a whole bunch of offshoots from blues players that were progressing, and that word is so important because they progressed in many ways, and they each got their own individual styles.
Some individual styles became dark and disturbing as the hippie dream was shattered by drug deaths, Altamont and the Manson murders. Things were getting heavy. The sinister theatricality of Arthur Brown inspired future metal performers, as did his extreme vocal range.
And he came to our school and did a show, and it was incredible. He got this Wagnerian sort of tenor range with things bolted on at each end that Wagner never really thought of. The light show and everything else.
Although we came from that time of the hippies, we were not actually like the, you know, the blissed out ones. It's quite nightmarish in some aspects. I had to leave one concert on the floor of a taxi covered by a carpet because the Hells Angels were all going to get me for saying I was the god of hellfire, you know. You think you're tough? Hey.
Beat writer William Burroughs had introduced the phrase heavy metal to the subculture in his sci-fi Nova trilogy, published. Heaviness, of course, wasn't exclusively British.
The killer awoke before dawn. He put his boots on.
In the States, bands like The Doors, Iron Butterfly and Vanilla Fudge could be heavy, but in a flamboyant, psychedelic kind of way.
Down the hall.
Heaviest of all was Blue Cheer, then perhaps the loudest, grungiest band in the world.
Punched out, really powerful guitars, and really didn't lay into a comfortable hippie area. Think about that era, 1967. Psychedelia, flower power, everything like that. And the Blue Cheer guys came out with something really heavy. It hit you so hard.
It was heavy stateside, yes. But it was quite a light, it was a light heavy, if I can put it that way. I mean, Vanilla Fudge, brilliant, astonishing musicianship and inventiveness, but it didn't hold the heaviness. It would float off.
I think Vanilla Fudge were hugely influential on rock music. And it was the first time we thought of hard rock, perhaps, as opposed to rock and roll.
In Britain, the Edgar Broughton Band chose not to fudge it. This underground trio weren't heavy metal, but they were heavy.
Up until then, you'd really either got to be a blues band or a
pop band
or a beat band. I think with the the psychedelic progressive era happening, you could sort of do your own thing, and you didn't have to be exactly labelled quite the same.
Hi, kid. Hello, sir.
What you wanna do, boy?
I mean, in some ways, we were almost sort of like hell-bent on not being progressive in some respects.
You wanna go to war, boy?
Oh, yes, please, sir. Yes, please, sir.
But in terms of the metal, if you go to the first album and songs like Psychopath on the second album, there was something sort of like pre-industrial music about that. Very riffy, very, very hard, sort of basic three-piece stuff. There weren't many bands that go on after us. No, really.
Because?
Well, because they didn't want to, because by the time we'd finished, and our audience had finished with us, sometimes people were a bit drained. It might not have had the sort of sheet metal of metal, but it definitely had the kind of balls of it, and the basic stance, I suppose, dealing again with quite dark things.
And Zeppelin popped up on the scene, and that was it.
Because it's really guitar-based, really, riffy, really heavy at times, without them having to, resort to putting on leather jackets and things. There was always a sort of classiness about Zeppelin, where they'd come up with these great riffs, and the four people would just nail that track.
It was just frenzied, tight, so tight, Page's sound wasn't that big. Quite scratchy sound, a lot of it, it wasn't really thick and huge. But it was all punched out, And this drummer was featured on this frenetic vocal line on top.
I've been down!
So that was really the motivation, I think, for the sound to develop. It all comes in the basic form from that exchange of American blues into blues rock then into electric psychedelic rock, progressive rock, and then the early strains of metal.
Those strains eventually came in 1969 from a struggling blues rock-type band comprising a bunch of blokes who lived round the corner to each other in Birmingham. They were about to change their name and their music, and in doing so, let the beast out of the box.
You'd never have thought this lineup would have got together. I didn't even know. Geezer was a guitar player. He'd never played bass in his life.
Ozzy was working in the slaughterhouse and thieving, and he did a few months in prison. Everybody was middle class that made it in music, except for us. We were ultra working class.
We were very rough and tough when we performed, and Ozzy and Tony in particular, they didn't stand any bullshit. And if they wanted people to get involved, they were very much encouraged to get involved. And there was 1 or 2 fights and with the audience because we wanted everybody to, be a part of this music.
Do you believe in ghosts?
The name came from the Boris Karloff movie Black Sabbath.
Starring the incomparable Boris Karloff.
Terry had brought that to us. And we all thought it was great because he sounded scary,
Yeah, my brother went to see it when he was about 16. And I was too young to go and see it, so he was always telling me about this film, Black Sabbath.
Black Sabbath.
And I always loved that name, Black Sabbath.
Black Sabbath.
And it stuck with me, and I always said if I was in a band, that's what I'd call the band, Black Sabbath.
Black Sabbath.
Well, Geezer and myself used to go to the cinema a lot and go and see a lot of horror films. We used to like that in them days, old Boris Karloff ones and Christopher Lee and all that. We used to like that. We used to go to the midnight viewing and all that business.
An adventure into black magic that goes beyond the boundaries of the supernatural.
Black Sabbath now began writing original material that reflected their fascination with and fear of the dark side.
I am hungry.
Vibe, I really like what we're doing here. So then it had to be lyrics that sort of went with that, the image of that riff.
One night I woke up and there was this black shape just staring at me at the bottom of the bed. And, I was frightened the bloody life out of me. And I leapt out of the bed and went and hid in the bathroom until I felt okay, and then I came back to bed. And the next day I told Ozzy about it. And I think that inspired him when he did, came out with the lyrics, "What is this that stands before me? Big black shape," and all that kind of thing.
When I sang "What is this that stands before me," I was completely there. I was completely there, and if we'd have stopped and never written another song again, that would have been enough. And we were very innocent. We were very innocent. We weren't smart. We weren't contrived. It just came out in a completely natural way. It's about 9 a.m. in the morning at the Aston Community Centre, right in the centre of Aston, Birmingham.
Everybody was in the world was all on about all the good things that's happening, and it was all flower power and everything's all jolly. And there on the other side of it, nobody was talking about the things that happen. That's people getting blown up, and just the other side of you got the good and the evil. And nobody was talking about the evil, so it just seemed a ideal thing to talk about, really.
Peace and love was not necessarily our reality. We came from Aston, which is a pretty rough and tough area in Birmingham, and there wasn't a whole lot of flowers being handed out in Aston. There's a few boots and a kick in the head every once in a while, and a few razor cuts. It was a tough town.
We didn't actually embrace the possibility of going to San Francisco with flowers in our hair for very long. It was a couple of months in '67, really. And then, you know, by the time the British winter started to bite, what is that, normally somewhere in October, I personally binned my bells and beads, and the kaftan wasn't keeping me too warm.
We were just reflecting on what our reality really did feel like, you know, and it felt like that, you know, and it felt like, you know.
We suddenly went from, you know, are you going to, whatchamacallit, sticking flowers in your hair, to, you know, this really, you know, I hate you and I've had enough of this and that and the other. And that was just a great catalyst, because suddenly people were like, you know, that's exactly how I feel. I ain't got flowers in my bloody hair, I've got weeds around the feet, you know. That's not my life, that's not what I'm going through. I've got this life, this existence that is really pissing me off. And now I've got some music that's talking about that.
Down south, the heavy organ and guitar-driven sound of Uriah Heep may have been a late 60s mix of progressive rock, blues rock and folk, but it was also, at its own admittance, very heavy.
The very heavy side of what we did was like gypsy, which is, you know, which you can probably say is, you know, nowadays with the journalistic pigeonholes there are, heavy metal, you know. But you can never call Uriah Heep totally heavy metal, because there was other things that we do, like we do a beautiful acoustic off that album, acoustic number called Come Away Belinda, you know, which is vocals and acoustic. So we always, as a band, wanted to do that. We wanted to exploit all of that. So we could never sort of fall under one banner. But as a part of us are, you know, heavy metal. I mean, we actually did, we used to rehearse in a place called Hamwell Community Centre in Acton, and in one room was Uriah Heep, and the next room was Deep Purple, so that was a hell of a racket going on there, you know. So
An infant British heavy metal took to the road to spread the gospel in the alternative rock way, on A roads, B roads, and early stretches of precious motorway.
We were probably classed as a row, to be honest. A loud row.
Right. Everywhere you went, it was sort of soul clubs, and I was just absolutely sick of going to places and listening to soul music. Because we all liked Hendrix and Cream and that kind of band, when we started writing, we obviously went with that kind of thing. I remember playing in pubs and we've struck the first chord up and been so loud that the barman's been catching the glasses, you know, it's jumped out of the bar and paid us and said, but don't play anymore, you know.
You did all the clubs, you did all the circuit and all the universities and everything, then you started building up a great following. But that was the essence of it, really, getting the following and the live work.
In the early days of metal, it was about getting in the van, driving up to Inverness, doing a show, and then getting back in the van, coming down to Birmingham, then driving down to Dover, you know, and you took the message of the music around the country to show it off. In person, in performance, in concert live.
Touring now is almost an industrial process. It was on a much more naive and more sort of charming scale back then, and I never got to sample it as a kid because I never saw any rock bands. It was a bit like the Marquis de Sade, who had all his sexual experiences locked in a jail cell, writing his fantasies on bits of bog paper. I was the same with music. So I had all my musical fantasies locked in its boarding school equivalent. You know, I could look at the gatefold album sleeves and only dream.
Formed in 1967 by guitarist Ritchie Blackmore and keyboard player John Lord, Deep Purple had made 3 albums by 1969 and toured with Cream. But they were on the road to heavy metal in search of an original sound.
People who put the money up that enabled Ritchie Blackmore and myself to start Deep Purple, I think they wanted a pop band. And then they got this kind of two-faced thing that they got with Purple at first, because the band didn't know what it was. We had a hit single with a cover of Hush, and yet we were doing these weird psychedelic prog rock introductions to other people's songs.
With the arrival of bassist Roger Glover and vocalist Ian Gillan, the Hairy Scream, the band released a fourth album in 1970. Deep Purple in Rock became a heavy milestone.
Okay, Hendrix was an obvious influence on Ritchie. Vanilla Fudge were an obvious influence on the band as a whole. But what made us go where we went with Deep Purple in Rock, which was our, if you like, our calling card, our statement. This was us saying, here we are, this is where we've arrived at, and this is what we want to be. That came from inside. That came from within the band. That's where we were headed. From the moment Ritchie and I sat down at 14 Gunter Grove in December 1967 and discussed what we were going to do together, that's where we were headed, was Deep Purple in Rock. Blackmore had this vision about where he wanted his guitar to go. So I just went, well, if his guitar's going to go there, then my organ has to go there. The Hammond has to toughen up.
I wanna hear you sing.
We had Gillan, who discovered this ability, as he now says, it was an aberration. He just discovered it one day. He could scream on a top A in full voice.
There's no word for it in music. There's a word for every other kind of singing. You're a tenor, you're a baritone, you're a bass, you're a contralto, you're a soprano. But what I do is called screaming.
By the end of the 60s, there was plenty to scream about. The Vietnam War was proof that the world was not a safe or happy place. When Black Sabbath first toured the States in 1971, they played to a nation with its own very real experiences of the dark side.
When we came over here, the Vietnam War was like, it was in chaos over here. I mean, the gigs, you play a gig and there'd literally be a line of police with tear gas and truncheons. Like, as soon as anybody came towards the stage, they'd be pummeling them. It was really violent over here. And the first gig we did in Washington, they'd overturned a police car and set it on fire. And this is what we're loading the gear up. There's like a riot going on all around us. I think kids were so angry over there, and this was the perfect music for the release of, you know, their anger.
There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of vets coming in to the shows, and they were in wheelchairs, and you know, they would have like a flag on their wheelchair. And so they got Children of the Grave, they got Iron Man. You know, there wasn't, they didn't need to translate it or anything else. They felt it, they heard it, they enjoyed it. And when we played War Pigs, God bless them, nearly to a man, they all stood up. They were being held up in their wheelchairs. And when you see that, you don't forget that. And didn't know I was going to cry this morning.
While American rock flirted with the darkness, British proto-metal bands faced the harsh realities of a 60s dream turned 70s nightmare head on.
There's something endemic in the British psyche, if you like, or the British way of looking at music or being a musician, that seems to be quite a gritty, no-nonsense way of looking at it. Lennon, I mean, you know.
Well, it's the Charge of the Light Brigade, isn't it? It's that British thing, you know. It's just, It's that thing that every 20-year-old feels. You know everything, and you're immortal. I mean, when I was 21, I did know everything, and I was immortal.
I keep coming back to this word dark. Dark satanic mills, you know, it's there in Blake's poetry. I think it's part of the British character. There's a cynicism, there's a darkness about us.
You can go to any village or town in, you know, England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and pluck out a history book of that area, and it's absolutely seeped in it, you know. So, for me, you know, being a lyricist and writing that type of song, it's a fantastic place to be, actually.
Already the feeling of a lot of people was, hang on a minute, we're making our own kind of new sound here. Metal, heavy metal music comes from the UK.
Sabbath were a conundrum because nobody sounded like Ozzy. Some kind of strange, scary soul that came through the music, and it was just the right kind of voice to complement the riffs, and the riffs just seemed to have their origin in the dark night of the soul of every adolescent.
That element of darkness, that kind of sombre, melancholy, you know, not exactly doom and gloom, but talking about things that in popular music, you never went there, did you? You know, the Beatles, She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, you know, and metal bands were singing about the angst and the pain and the difficult things in life. That was quite an important statement.
Despite being ridiculed by the rock press, the early rumblings of British heavy metal began to surface around the country. They were heard in the Welsh valleys courtesy of Budgie, a band that adhered more to the blues-based power of Led Zeppelin and Free than the paranoia of Black Sabbath. British heavy metal was still in a molten state as it edged its way through communities that were also on the brink of change.
There are a lot of places around the valleys, you know, the South Wales valleys, you know, every village would have about 10 clubs in it. You have the Labour Club, the Conservative Club, the Liberal Club, the non-political club, the Miners' Welfare, the Rugby Club. It just, they'd all be sort of having a shindig on a Saturday night. Chopping licks. They're good gaps. Bam, gap. Ba-dum, dum, gap. In between that gap, there's this drum. Bam, pam, boom, that, you know, fills the gap. Pound it out with a big fat chord. And I just get a big kick. We all did. That's what we like doing.
Slowly come girl to my bed.
I never bought a Black Sabbath album or Uriah Heep or Deep Purple. Never did. Not my type of music. I wasn't interested. Black Sabbath, who was signed at the same time as us, they were doing their demos. We had to wait till they finished theirs so we could do ours. It was at that stage of the game, like, you know. And what did they come out with? Paranoid? Think of Communication Breakdown, you know, that tick. Well, it's the same thing. They did it slightly different. They put their chopped chord in a different place, but they won.
Tony Iommi's riffs were heavy, you know, they were big, and they were always like, they never were up the fretboard here, they were always down there, you know.
The essential thing for a metal song is the guitar riff. Has to be killer.
Symptom of the inverse.
Now, what came first, the riff or the chicken? I don't know, or the singer or the egg? I don't know. But it's very interesting that with blues, there were always some kind of riffs that were very simple, and this is how it started.
That one.
Brooke Benton had a hit record with a song called Kiddio, which had a riff which went "Boo-doodle-doo-doo, told you baby how I feel, boo-doodle-doo-doo," and it said "doo-doodle-doo-doo." That was very, and you see that, you hear that on a lot of riffs, and then suddenly, some years later, you hear that "boo-doodle-doo-doo," you hear "boo-ding-a-ding-ding," ding-a-ding-ding, same notes, just a different slant on the whole thing, and that's blues based.
Smoke and Water's one, isn't it?
The riff of Black Knight was actually nicked from a little bass riff that under Ricky Nelson's version of Summertime. That just went like that. Well, we just put that little turnaround in it. So riffs had always been part of it, but then they got louder, and then they became a part of the song.
Black night, don't need black night. I can't see dark light. Maybe a find on the way down the line that I'm free. Black night is a long way from.
And I think each band tries to out heavy the next.
So you need like a heavyometer.
Maybe, yeah, heaviosity.
By the mid-70s, proto-metal had developed a pact with its growing audience to provide ear-splitting, bone-crunching walls of sound. The music was becoming louder as well as prouder.
We were playing something that was responsive. So you would have to respond to it. We very much wanted to say, you know, hey, we're playing here, listen to us. So that's one of the core reasons why we got louder and got much, much louder. We got very loud.
I think we use volume to enhance certain parts. Like you play a quiet part, and then the volume coming into a loud bit would be more power, the power of the thing. We try to use it in not just because it's loud. We try to use it as a part of the song.
Those people that don't understand metal, firstly, it's, oh man, it's too loud, you know, it does my head in. Well, for us, that's the joy of it. That's the luxury of it. Give us more volume, turn everything past 10.
You got to crank it up. You need steam coming out of it. You need your foot to the floor, pedal to the metal. You need it at maximum revs. You never get off the ground otherwise.
When Blackmore was grinding it out on the other side of the stage, there was a tremendous excitement. You know, I wanted to hear that Hammond growling away madly. I rapidly became quite pleased that we were on the stage and not in the audience.
Lucky for us, you know, we've got these ears here to protect us, you know, because we've got the flaps here, you know, and the music's behind us, you know, but these, they're right in front of it, you know.
Nobody gonna take my wife, they're gonna leave all in the bed. Nobody gonna take my wife, they're gonna keep her praying.
You would see suddenly wall-to-wall Marshall stacks, and that, I mean, had you cowering in the corner before they even turned on the standby switch.
You know, in fact, you know, often the cry came up from the crowd, you know, turn it up, you know.
The dark, heavy metal sound and its powerful dynamic range owed a debt to the shock and awe of symphonic music.
I definitely think classical music plays its part in heavy metal.
Why are orchestras so big? Why do they have such huge brass sections and string sections in symphony orchestras? You could quite easily play the same music with a couple of each. The reason they have 80 or 90 or 100 if they can is these huge, massive percussion sections and 8 double basses. I mean, it's amazing. But it's natural to want to create power.
Some bands, inspired by the heaviness of Sabbath, Deep Purple and Uriah Heep, pushed the music further away from its blues roots and into a faster form of metal-sounding rock. Birmingham-based Judas Priest began forging a new kind of high-tensile British steel, less gloomy, but pumped up with the volume of not one, but 2 guitars.
Music, it's about get out there and do it with your life. It's actually a very positive outlook lyrically on everything, you know, and survive. And
there's a need for something new. There's a need for a new sound. There's a need to see a new band, to hear a new way of playing guitar, a new way of singing.
Rob Halford's 6-octave vocal range confirmed that the scream was now a frontline weapon in the metal armoury. Men in Heat would sound like girls in pain. The high and hairy legacy of Robert Plant and Ian Gillan was here to stay.
The Americans absolutely loved Robert Plant. He was, you know, the big, the blonde hair and everything else, and the, slightly ambivalent sexuality.
Way down inside.
The Americans thought, great, you're just going to be tall and skinny and sing real high. And that was the definition of a heavy metal singer.
How does Ozzy do it? How does Lemmy do it? How do I do it? How does Bruce do it? Bruce is a bit younger than me. But I mean, it's mad, isn't it, when you think about it? I mean, I get up in the morning, have a cup of tea and some cornflakes, and that night I'm going to be on stage screaming my tits off. The style of that singing, the roots of that singing, you listen to some of the early blues singers and people like Janis Joplin, when she's going absolutely crazy. You know, she's mad, she's possessed, but that was unusual for a girl to put on that kind of very almost masculine display. And that's what part of metal is about for a lot of singers. It's the intensity of the performance, you know.
I'm in love, so in love, and I can't stop talking about my
It's like, when I've done a show and I go back to the hotel room and I'm lying in bed and I'm like, was that me? Did I just do that? You've got to be able to balance it out. I'm not on stage 24 hours a day. I need to be able to go down to Morrison's and do my shopping.
The Beast was developing a uniquely tribal, highly physical relationship with its dedicated audience. A union that was blessed most spectacularly in concert, live.
You feel uplifted, you feel excited, you feel like aggression is pouring out of you. You feel like you absolutely want to go, yeah! When you know you're witnessing something very special and you know that everybody else around you feels the same way.
You know, if you don't do something, that involves the audience, then it just, it's not good. You have to, use that power in a great way to make people feel good and have a good time.
A good time was being had by all. Well, not all exactly. Audiences tended to be dominated by boys and men, absorbed in displays of private dancing, tribal headbanging and air guitar playing to a music that didn't seem to appeal much to women.
You're in some hall somewhere, some smelly club with a bunch of hairy biker types and a lot of dandruff flying up around, and I don't know, just not so cute, It's there weren't that many women involved.
Metal is, it's fair to say, primarily male. It is.
Again, in the early days, it made sense because it was a very very brutal, intense type of experience.
Somehow metal became a male domain and male province because of the lifestyle, the denim and leather, the patches and so forth, the collectability. It all spoke to the male psyche rather than the female one.
Because it's primarily male, people assume it's therefore sexist. And actually it's not. It's very inclusive. Girlies do Hannah Montana more, which is a shame, you know, because I wish they'd do a bit more metal, you know.
Seemed to be the obligatory proto-metal dress code of those offstage as well as on.
You know, the bell bottoms, the long hair and the whole thing, you know, it was just, it was the total package, wasn't it, you know, down your knees, giving it some, you know, happy days.
I mean, the Americans really had scarves and things wrapped round them. And they did, though, you know, Aerosmith and Van Halen, it's all a bit, you know, it's all a bit West Coasty, Beach Boy thing. But we were more like studs and metal and swords and, you know, medieval. I think it's the history thing.
Among the British bands, it was Judas Priest who would take the heavy metal look further, firstly with brightly coloured spandex, and then on to what became the classic, faintly homoerotic metal uniform of tight black leather and studs, the biker look, including the bike.
The big thing was it became international. It went out of the borders of the UK and Europe. It started to go all over the place, particularly in the States.
British heavy metal proved to be a hugely successful export, particularly in the States. Its toughness, directness, monster sound and sheer sense of scale seemed to strike a power chord with blue-collar America, from Pittsburgh to Detroit, New York to LA. While bands like Sabbath and Uriah Heep were still unsung prophets in their own land, the vast touring network of the States rewarded them with adulation, money and success.
And we had the Learjets and we had the whole floor of the hotel and bodyguards outside. And it was all silly stuff, but it was just fantastic, you know. They just took it on board and they couldn't get enough of it, yeah.
That's when we really did come into a load of different people. Let's put it that way. They come out of the woodwork, some real strange people, witches and all sorts of things, you know. We attracted so many strange people.
And we used to have wizards turning up at the dressing room and outside and stuff. And we'd bring them in and have a laugh with them and stuff, you know. I mean, it got really, really silly, you know, wizards turning up everywhere.
You gotta be a baby. You gotta be a baby to go to heaven.
If some Americans worshipped at the altar of British heaviness, others adopted the role of witchfinder generals, self-appointed saviours, fighting to protect the vulnerable souls of America's impressionable youth.
You'd switch the local news on, you'd Black Sabbath are in town and they're all Satanists. If you go into the concert, don't look them in the eyes or you'll be possessed.
Hail Satan! Hail Satan!
A lot of the people that believed in Jesus Christ were really, really, really convinced that we were a satanic band, an evil band, and deserved to die. And I believe they actually tried that a couple of times.
We were due to play in America at this town, and the church banned us from playing. For some reason, the church got burnt down. And guess who got the blame?
So they really did think that we were a band that got a manager called Lucifer. Actually, we did have a manager called Lucifer, but that's a different story.
Satan went mainstream in 1973 with the American movie The Exorcist. But America's fundamentalist fear of unwittingly importing British paganism through music wasn't totally unfounded. Strange goings-on were often the order of the day in Camp Heavy.
We used to do all sorts of things. We used to drag people off in the middle of the night and go and sort of sit in the middle of the Roll Right Stones or some site and stuff and sort of get into all that stuff. And that was it. I mean, so many things were in our music.
There was stuff going on,
really.
there wasn't it, with you? You were into a bit of dark.
Me?
Dark stuff when you were about.
Was I? Yeah.
Brief flirtation with the old darker side.
Yeah.
But I suppose everybody, I mean, it was something everybody was getting into. I mean, it was been taboo, you know, to talk about things like Alice
Spiritual things and occult things and...
Yeah.
Now we're not all devil worshippers, are we? Now I think most bands will deny that they've got, you know, they're in league with Satan.
I got this flat on my own and I painted it all black and had all these crosses upside down everywhere and pictures of Satan and everything.
The aim is always at Christ, you know, Christianity. That's what it's always at, you know. All, you know, Judas Priest, Black Sabbath and all the rest of them, you know. The names are all fiddling around and they sound menacing, they do, you know.
Ye lords of the watchtowers of the south, I summon stir...
I'm a Christian, so I don't mess with anything like that, you know, because I read in the Bible that it's a bad thing, you know, to mess around with anything.
In my particular case, I stopped doing certain things very early on in our career because things got out of control. It's the best way that I can put it. So, and you know, I'll leave that as something that was private to me. Because there is macabre inside us, inside everyone. You know, lust is just such a large source of energy that can drain us in good ways and bad ways.
There's a lot of weird things happen within Sabbath that we couldn't explain. Might have been the drugs, but I don't think so.
As the night wears on, the witches by tradition become more frenzied in their enjoyment of this religion. In their eagerness to prove their magical powers, they show their ability to ignore pain.
I mean, this is just beyond these people. I mean, those kids that are doing it, they don't believe they're doing anything particularly wrong. They don't believe there's a devil, they don't believe there's a God, you know. They just think it's a lark, you know.
I mean, there's a few, you know, Satan references in some of our songs and lyrics. I don't know why. It just seems right to be singing about that kind of subject matter over this kind of music.
Love blows where my rose will go down. It doesn't fit. It's heavy, so if it's heavy metal, it's what you call heavy metal, then you've got a pretty heavy lyric to it. And I suppose writing about the darker forces and the darker sides of whatever fits the music. I mean, you would hardly write about a love song to that kind of heaviness.
Somehow, Satan is the, you know, it's more appropriate somehow over this Titanic riffage, you know.
They want to look demonic now, they want to look like demons now, you know. Shaved head, covered in tattoos, you know, the little goatee beardy things, you know.
Some people say that, well, you set yourselves up. You know, if you're a Marilyn Manson, you set yourselves up for trouble. If you're an Aussie biting the alphabet, you set yourselves up for trouble, and you don't. We're entertainers. That might sound a very flimsy way to describe us. We're entertaining you, we're giving you a great night out. You know, come and see the band with your mates, have a great night out, and that's basically what it's about, surely.
It did just cross my mind that the devil could be included in some way, or could have his hands on it in some way. But kind of, you know, in the lust for glory of it all, you take no notice anyway and you just keep going, you know, say nothing.
There was nowhere like this anywhere in this country at the time. Because it was a street-driven thing, there was no national link, there was no, you know, they were everywhere, but they needed somewhere to believe in, somewhere to go, a place to call their own.
It took 5 years, really, of very, very hard work and a lot of persistence to change the whole situation around. These days, as you're well aware, we run 5 nights a week, hard rock, and soul's gone straight out the door. That way, sideways.
Neil Kay and the Soundhouse Punters took the initiative and began building a scene of their own, one that would unite the heavy metal fraternity.
We had regulars fly over from Northern Ireland. We had people coming from Jersey. And then, in the latter years of the wagon, we started getting them from Europe too. And when they arrived, what they found was this huge, great sound system that absolutely crushed anything that stood in its path. So people that came to the club could hear rock as if it were a concert. It seemed as if the gods of rock and roll, Natch, were parting the Red Sea to let us through.
The Soundhouse quickly became the mecca for headbanging and air guitar, and then the birthplace of a new form of spectator sport, courtesy of club regular Rob Loonhouse.
Rob walked in the door one day, somewhere about 1976, I guess, and under his arm he had this hardboard Flying V.
Has he got frets on it?
Oh, no, don't bother with frets, you know. I think it's taking the piss a bit, really, you know, when you put frets on it, you know, you're making it look too much like a real guitar.
Everyone said, Rob, hello, what are you going to do with that? There's no strings on it. Well, I don't need strings. When you go to a classical concert, you get the music on music paper to follow it through. You're not a lunatic for doing this. You're passionately wrapped up and involved in the intensity of the performance, and you wish to follow the moves the musicians are making. The people coming to the Soundhouse were the same kind of people with the same ethics. They wanted to be inside the music. They wanted to be as close to it as they possibly could get.
The lifeblood of the metal scene coagulated and scabbed into something that could now be identified. But the musicians who made the music were often uneasy with their new heavy metal tag.
I've never liked the phrase, and I've never applied it to Deep Purple.
You see the big debate of who's metal and who's rock and who's hard rock and who's heavy metal.
I liked hard rock because it said exactly what it was. It was rock and roll, but it was played with aggression. And then some people started calling it heavy rock. And I'm not quite sure where the word heavy came from, possibly after Black Sabbath.
This came up many years ago with me, because I always classed ourselves as heavy rock.
Well, it kind of changed over when sort of Motorhead and people come out like that, where it was like full on, you know, then they were actually heavy metal.
In 1975, the man known simply as Lemmy stepped off Hawkwind's Silver Machine to form the band that was Motorhead. Out went space rock, in came the punter-driven, user-friendly garage approach. Out went acid, in came speed. But was it heavy metal thunder or just rock and roll? He wasn't saying. He still doesn't.
Don't analyse it. I told you, man, before we started.
I'm not analysing it, I'm just asking.
Yeah, but you're trying to understand why. You can just enjoy it at face value, that's right. Well, it's fairly simple, and it's very loud, and it's very fast. And it's great driving music if you like driving into the side of bridges. And it's great music for hurling yourself off trees by. It gets a lot of emotion out of you that would otherwise be channeled into bad things, maybe, you know. I do it because I like it. I don't know why, I just like it. I like it. Is that so wrong? People who work in a factory, right, or some awful fucking mind-numbing job like that. Because I worked in a factory, I know what it's like. It's fucking awful. Yeah? Most people have to do with that kind of job that they hate every day of their lives. Can you imagine what that must be like? You have to submerge your intellect completely, right, and just, you know, and all that. So at the weekend, they want to hear something that tears the heart out of them and gives it them back better, you know.
This works for the people that are into modern fashion, right?
By 1976, it didn't matter what you called it. Punk was trampling everything underfoot on its DIY three-chord advance. Everything, that is, except metal, which seemed to have a built-in resistance. Its champions didn't even get their hair cut.
I don't think punk musicians or fans really thought much about metal because it didn't have that definition. If you actually said to a punk fan in 1977, do you like Budgie? Probably go, who? If you said, do you like Caravan? Rubbish. Hate them. Nonsense. Die.
I don't know if it damaged the line at all. Now I think it just kind of gave it a bit more of a kick, you know, and made it a bit faster and a bit more powerful and a bit more. Maybe brought it back down to the street a bit, so that the kids could get back up on stage, you know.
I mean, the thing is, you can think, well, if these guys can put this energy out without being able to play very well, we can put a lot more energy out because we can play better. So, you know.
I used to think I'm going to have to practice for like 15 years to be as good as Richie Blackmore, at least. So when punk rock came along, I thought, I can play like that, you know, so maybe I should simplify my ideas a little bit.
I gotta stop now!
This aggression that the punk music had, we quite liked, you know, we liked it. You know, I think it really affected us. I don't think we copied it anywhere, but I think it went into our psyche.
Motown and Damn toured together quite a lot. So there was that crossover at some point between punk and metal and an energy exchange, and both happily coexisted.
Well, we sounded like punk, so they liked us already. And then they saw we had long hair, it was too late. They'd already committed themselves. I always wanted to be obnoxious, because all the bands I liked are obnoxious, you know. MC5, and we came out at the same time as the punks, and I thought they were splendid, you know. And the Damned, you know, great fun, you know.
Rock made its big mistake by becoming fat and loathsome and bloated and pompous, and so lost contact with the street.
What had been our baby, our shining creation, had become tarnished and a little. It had become overblown. It was playing its own cliches rather than inventing new cliches.
Black Sabbath was spending more time in America, cut off from their dark British roots, suffering from a creative stasis of their own, aided by old-fashioned drug and booze abuse.
I was the one going to the record company, giving all the lines, you know. When they would go there and they say, how's the album coming on? Oh, great. How's the songwriting? Yeah, it's really coming on. When are we going to be able to hear some stuff? Oh, soon. We hadn't got anything.
We were totally knackered some gigs, so you'd take a bit of the old coke to get you through the gig. And eventually you start relying on it. You know, you start getting heavily into drugs. And doing silly things out of our brains.
First of all, it was very creative, we found. We could stay up and we'd be coming up with ideas and we'd talk a lot more. Certainly with Coke, we'd be up all night, talking away. Oh, it was fantastic. We had some great discussions. We'd never remember them the next day, but we had some great discussions, and no, it did help a lot to open each other up and to talk.
When we did Volume 4, and we'd done so much, we'd done more coke. The cocaine bill was more than the recording bill. And the recording bill was 80,000.
But later on, it got with that and the drink. It sort of took an ugly turn, really. And the first casualty, of course, was Ozzy, you know, and Bill.
I came off tour not because I didn't like Tony or I didn't like Geezer or something like that. It's because I placed more priority on drinking than I did the band. And that might be a shameful thing to say, but it's the truth. That's the truth.
And we were coming up with ideas, and we'd walk in the lounge and Ozzy would be asleep on the couch. And you just couldn't, we couldn't communicate anymore.
Ozzy Osbourne was sacked from Black Sabbath by bandmate Bill Ward in 1979. Ward left the band himself soon afterwards.
It's like being outside of the phenomena. And so, and Ozzy knows how to sing to no time. It's a tremendous skill. It's really, really difficult. And he's so far left or far right that he has those capabilities. And singers that sing in time can't sing Black Sabbath, because Black Sabbath is not in time.
They had to invent, you know, the Friday rock show thing, didn't they, to play it, because it couldn't be on mainstream radio. But I think in some respects it backfired on them, because it made us bigger, you know. I mean, it did really make us, you know, rebels, really. But I think it gave us a bit of will to get out of all that and succeed at something we loved doing.
Saxon were, if you like, they were our granddaddies. They'd been doing working men's clubs in Barnsley for years, you know, and all around the north. So they came on the well-oiled machine, and we were like, wow, they had people to tune their guitars and everything, you know.
All right, first of two heavy metal bands on Top of the Pops, it's Saxon.
You know, we did Top of the Pops and, you know, Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran, and they'd all be there, you know, with the red carpet. We'd like wander in from out of a taxi at the back. We were treated more like, you know, the bad boys. It wasn't real music. You know, because we wrote about things like motorbikes and steam trains and jet planes and, you know, fighter pilots being on drugs, you know, up in the sky. I just think the music had to match, so it had to be aggressive and fast for us. You know, we're using the, you know, the same format as the older bands. Great guitar riff, melodic vocal, but we were just condensing it much faster, you know.
The difference between seeing Led Zeppelin at Nebworth, 200,000 people, you know, you've got to think when you're in your bedroom practicing and hoping to play a pub up the road, how on earth are we ever going to get to Nebworth? You know, what's that? What have we got to write to achieve that? It was almost felt like we missed the boat, really, and we kept scratching our heads thinking, why don't they sign Diamond Head? And we'd even get, you know, pieces written about us in Sounds. Why has no one signed this band?
Where Diamond Head failed, Iron Maiden succeeded. With punk-like aggression, dressed in a full metal jacket, the power and the glory was theirs for the taking. Vocalist Bruce Dickinson was already a devoted student of metallurgy, a classicist, when he first saw Iron Maiden perform.
It was a force of nature. I mean, I was like, wow, this is not, you know, this is real. This is full on. This is like being hit by a truck. You know, every single song. The musicianship was fantastic. Guitar playing was, you know, astounding. And I got to say, the only thing I looked at was the singer, and I thought, I should be there. I thought, God, it reminded me of an album that the first album I ever listened to from Deep Purple in Rock, which is a really heavy record, you know, really exciting, raw and fresh. And I could hear so many little echoes of that kind of excitement. It was like being plugged into the mains. And I just thought, God, if I was singing with that band, wow. Oh well, never mind.
As if by black magic, Dickinson was asked to front Iron Maiden in 1981, the year the band went stratospheric. Finally, British heavy metal had a face, a name, and a number. It was branded 666. The beast was back in business.
And The Number of the Beast, the first album I was on, was #1 in God knows how many countries around the world. It broke us in America. We actually had quite a run of hit singles. It was really aggressive, in-your-face music, but it had great musicianship, and it had interesting words and stories, and, you know. So it was a fantastical world that you could enter in. And the whole rest of the year went like that. And we went round to America twice, we went to Japan, we went all around Europe.
It's a song called Run to the Hills!
We toured our socks off. All those adolescent dreams sat up in bed, you know, drawing pictures on my back of my exercise books of big PAs and drum kits and things like that in biro on the backs of things, saying, yeah, our back line should look like that. That would be really nasty looking, yeah, you know. That all happened. My absolute wildest dreams had all happened in a year. And I was a bit depressed, to be honest with you, because I thought, what do I do now? What do I do now? I suppose I do the same again next year, but bigger.
Metal, under the supreme leadership of Iron Maiden, did just that. It got bigger and bigger, far beyond even the wildest dreams of its naive originators. Even Deep Purple vocalist Ian Gillan was belatedly inducted into the cult when he joined Black Sabbath in 1983 for one album entitled Born Again.
I don't know how I got in Black Sabbath anyway, because we ended up drunk under a table. I went for a meeting with Tony and Geezer at the Bear in Woodstock. And I don't remember anymore. And I got a call from my manager, Phil Banfield, the next morning saying, Ian, if you're going to make career decisions, then, you know, I really think you should call me first. I said, what are you talking about? He said, apparently last night you agreed to join Black Sabbath. Well, anything else in the diary? He said, no, not at the moment, so. I went on tour with them. The whole thing lasted a year, I think, and it was the longest party I've ever been to. It was fantastic.
On its rampage from the 60s to the 80s, the British heavy metal beast had consumed all manner of musics. It had emerged triumphant, a glorious band of brothers with a huge fan base that worshipped its codes, sounds and symbols.
A lot of people that don't understand metal, they stick the boot in and say, oh, it's rubbish, it's crap, it's meaningless, it's Neanderthal, it's got no value. I kind of like that. I really do. We'll always be the underdog in rock and roll to a certain extent.
The big thing about heavy metal is, you know what? You lot over there who don't like us and don't want to like us, fine. You go on slaughtering us, because we have tens, hundreds of thousands, millions of fans who want us, love our music, will always be there for us. And weighing it up, do we want them? Do we want you? Yeah, we know where we're going to go, and we're going to go that way.
It's not nostalgia like most music is. It's like it stays with them. It just feels like it's something that hasn't sold out. More of a religion, I suppose, like soccer, football. It's like, you know, you grow up supporting your team and it becomes part of you until you die.